kick off our first Youth Sunday of 2020. Let's hear from our youth over here. Come on, you guys. You guys are so quiet. Don't be intimidated. We know you're loud most of the time. So we got our Ignite, our 4th through 5th grade, as well as our Amplify, which is our 6th through 8th grade. And so we're so excited to have you guys here. And to help me with this message today, we have one of our youth pastors, Pastor Jesse Tagura, who is our Ignite youth pastor. He's been the youth pastor there with our young people. Imagine that, ministering to 4th through 5th graders on purpose for over 5 years. We got to thank him for that, you guys. That's amazing. That's amazing right there. And he's still sane and he's alive to tell about it. In fact, you know, I've heard him preaching at midweek. I've heard him preaching at camps, ministering to our own boys. And I just wanted you guys to be able to hear from his heart as well. And when I was sitting with Pastor Jesse at Starbucks and we were kind of talking through what God was putting on our heart, as I sat across the table from him as we were sipping our coffees, I heard the heart of David. It was like I was sitting across the table from a David, and I was so thankful for an opportunity for you guys to hear his heart as well, because he's running after the heart of God. And that's exactly how God describes David as we continue to learn lessons from a king. King David was described this way by God himself in Acts 13:22. After removing Saul, he made David their king. He testified concerning him, "I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do." Well, you know, I don't know what's going to be said about me at my memorial service, but for all my mistakes and failures, if I can even get close to a description like that, that's a life well lived. That he did everything that God wanted him to do, that he spent his life chasing after not this or that, but chasing after the heart of God. Now, what happens when you and I live that focused? Here's what happens. Acts 16:13-36 says, David had served God's purpose in his own generation. How many of us want to fulfill God's purpose for our life? Yeah, absolutely. This is not a generational thing. This isn't just a young thing or an older thing. This is an all of us thing, all of us seeking God together. How do we do that? By chasing after the heart of God, by keeping that focus in our view. By focusing on him, God will fulfill the purpose in this generation. In other words, there's still breath in your lungs. God's not done. There's something else for you to do, or he would have brought you home already. There's a purpose to be fulfilled. Walking in purpose, ministering in purpose, living out a purpose-driven life before the Lord. How do we do that? By chasing after God's heart. But it gets easy to get distracted. It gets easy to lose focus. You can imagine that when David was just a shepherd in a field, taking care of stinky sheep, and he never saw him mounting to anything, let alone a king. And yet here comes Samuel to anoint a new king from the sons of Jesse, even while King Saul was still on the throne. So Samuel goes down the boys and says to Papa Jesse, none of your boys here are the ones that God has chosen. Do you have anything else? And he says, well, I mean, almost as an afterthought, there's my son David out in the back 40 with the sheep. And Samuel's like, I'll wait. And they go and get David and bring him before him, and he pours the oil over David's head, anointing him at age 16 to be the future king of Israel. Now, I don't know what David thought in that moment, but you can imagine he's thinking it's all going up from here. 16, and it's a path straight to the throne. And yet what we know is between the anointing as king and the ascendancy as king at age 30, there was 14 years of lots and lots of trouble, where God took this guy that saw himself as nothing but a zero, turned him into a hero. The hero's journey requires obedience in the darkest places. I don't know, maybe you're like David, and maybe you've been an afterthought or defined by your past or even by your own family and friends as not amounting to much, but God wants to redefine you, and a lot of times that happens. The restoration of your purpose for being here, it happens in the dark places. In fact, that's actually where we're going to camp out. In Psalm 142, we get a psalm from David. It's described as a maskil, or an instruction from David, what he wrote while in the cave of Adullam. That's right. We get this point in David's history when he was probably at one of his lowest places. And as we learn from how he processed through this place with God, maybe we can learn how to process through our own low places. Are you in here this morning and you're facing a delay, a detour, or a dead end? If you are, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're watching online, because God wants to show you that it's in these darkest places. It's when your back is up against the wall, literally, there's nowhere else to go, that you will see him clearer than ever before. You see, David was literally on the run for his life. Yeah, he was anointed as king. Yeah, he took down Goliath. But just before he finds a hiding place in the cave of Adullam, he finds out from his best friend Jonathan, who happens to be the son of King Saul. Jonathan says to David, if you don't leave, my dad's going to kill you. So not only is he running for his life from a leader that he was supposed to be able to trust, but now he also had to leave behind his family and his best friend, and he's all alone. And he's in that place of desolation. And just outside the cave, you can almost picture him looking out into the light. 2 miles south of the cave of Adullam is the very field where he slayed Goliath, the giant. At this point, it's probably more like salt in the wounds. Really, God? You let me see that amazing victory, and this is where I am? In this place where I'm running for my life? This is not how I saw this playing out. This is a raw deal. I've just been trying to obey you. Anyone else ever feel that way? I was told that obedience releases blessing, and that's a scriptural and spiritual truth. But here's where we get it wrong. We think the blessing comes in our time, but it actually comes in his. And sometimes the blessing is actually in the cavern. It's in the cave, because it's there that you and I in the cavern are called back to a focus on Christ. You can fill that in your first blank. The caverns call us back to a focus on Christ. Yeah, you never know. Find when you have your phone and you're trying to take a picture of someone, but the focus is all off because it's focusing on so many other things that when you look back at the picture, the face of the person you were trying to get is blurry and everything else is in focus. I think some of us are actually in that place right now spiritually. That's certainly where David was running for his life. He was focusing on the wrong things and everything was out of focus. That's true in phone cameras. That's true with these extremely expensive cameras that shoot this message out all over the world to our online congregation. Is if they don't focus on the right thing, then eventually all we see is the wrong thing. Eventually we can't see much at all but this big blur that's supposed to be John Burgess. Hello, it's me. And I think if we're honest, some of us, we've got a blurry view of the face of God. And when we started following him, it was a clear view. That's all we cared about was his heart. We were running after him. But maybe like David, we have faced one rejection, one situation, one betrayal too many. And now we're focused on so many other things, we can no longer focus on him. Sometimes God has to remove all the other outputs and inputs, all the other options, all the other voices, get us into a dark, quiet place where the only thing we can see is him. That's certainly what was going on with David, and you can see that coming through as he processes through this situation with God. In his prayer in Psalm 142, starting in verse 1, he says, I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him, I tell my trouble. Now, let me just stop right there. David is teaching us how to pray, even when we're angry. Some of us are mad at God because we've gotten mad at God. We've stopped talking to God. Well, because Christians aren't supposed to be mad at God, so I'm just not even going to pray. Listen, the worst thing you can do is stop talking to God. Because when we stop talking to him, we stop hearing him. It's a relationship. And God would much rather have an angry prayer than no prayer. Because at least an angry prayer is turning your focus back towards the Lord. You've got to be looking at him if you want to talk to him. Even if you're frustrated, even if you're offended, even if you're afraid, bring it to the Lord. We get a litany of those kind of prayers in the book of Psalms, and I'm so thankful we get this raw, unedited versions of what prayers look like when a man or woman comes to God in the middle of their dark times, their seasons of delay, detour, and dead ends. God wants to bring a new beginning. And you can even see that beginning here in verse 3, when my spirit grows faint within me. In other words, I have nothing left to give, God. It is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. He's talking about, of course, King Saul, who is trying to trap him, to kill him. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. He's talking, of course, about his best friend, Jonathan, his wingman. He now has nobody by his side. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. And I'm wondering if there's some of us in that place right now. And what God wanted to show David in the darkness of that cave was that the same God that was with him then on the battlefield with Goliath is the same God that will be with him again in the darkness of this cavernous cave, is the same God that will bring to pass what he promised him all the way back when he was 16 years old. The same God then is the same God again. Sometimes God has to bring us back to bring us forward. Sometimes we need to experience a demotion before the promotion. Sometimes the cave prepares us for kingship. Whatever it is that you're going through, there's a lesson to be learned from it. Don't try and get through it without talking to God about it. You see, David had forgotten a few important anchors for his soul, some things that were very in focus when he was just a shepherd in the field with sheep, but had gone out of focus. He'd forgotten a few things, and I wonder if we've forgotten a few things too, maybe not even because of sin, or certainly people's chasing us down, but maybe just because of the sheer amount of busyness and information in our lives. Anybody ever forgetful sometimes? Raise your hand, raise your hand. Anyone ever forgetful? Okay, yeah, you see, you're not alone. You're not alone. And by the way, this is not an age thing. It turns out even young people forget, according to this recent study. 25% of teens forget major details of close friends and relatives. Huh? Yeah, you guys forgot it was my birthday, didn't you? No, I'm just kidding. It's not. It's not. 7% of people forgot their own birthday. Who's ever forgotten your own birthday? Anyone here? Yeah. Who wants to forget your birthday? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. 39% of Americans will forget one basic piece of information or lose one everyday item. Okay, confession time. Who's lost their keys, their phone, their wallet, their child? You know who you are, right? We've all lost those things. And why is it that we're forgetting more and more? Because there's so much input into our brains. Our brains were literally not made to hold this much information. So guess what? We retain the useless stuff and we forget the important stuff. And we live in a constant state of distraction. We're so easily distracted. According to this study, an average office worker will check their email inbox 30 times every hour. That's every 2 minutes, folks. Every 2 minutes, we're checking our inbox, and we'll pick up their phones more than 1,500 times per week, amounting to 3 hours and 16 minutes a day. It's not just a young person thing. Some people think that their phone is an actual appendage because it's never out of their hand. No matter where they go, no matter what they do, they're talking to people. In fact, more accidents are happening these days because of the perfect selfie at the edge of the cliff, right? Or they're talking to somebody right in the way of a bus, right? And we are focusing on the wrong things. And we're living in a constant state of distraction. And it's actually reducing our attention span. On the average web page user will read at most 28% of the words during a visit, usually only 20%. The average page visit lasts less than a minute, and users often leave a web page in just 10 to 20 seconds. Okay, in other words, if what I was saying right now was written down, you wouldn't have even gotten to this point in the sermon. He would have already gone to the next page. And it's like when something's taking too long to load, you're like, I don't care, I'm gonna go to the next thing. Can't be that good. We've become a people of headlines. All we're reading is headlines. We don't got time to actually read what the article's about. And then we're walking around talking about, hey, did you hear about this? Or what's going on with the coronavirus? Or did you hear about the weather? And we actually don't know what's going on at all because we've become so shallow that there's actually no depth. And God is calling us to get back our focus on the right things. As a result of being trained by the internet, by social media, our attention span has markedly decreased in just 15 years. In 2000, it was 12 seconds. Now, 15 years later, it's shrunk significantly to 8.25 seconds. Now, that was 2015. I'm sad to say it's not going up. is going down. And worse of all, we're now in competition with goldfish. You guys, this is not good news. I don't know how science determines the attention span of a goldfish, but apparently they can focus on something for 9 seconds, and you and I are around 8 or 7 seconds. Now just picture that. You've got the goldfish watching its air bubbles float to, what else does it do? Watching the air bubbles float to the top. They can watch their air bubbles for 9 seconds. We can't even last that long. Are you kidding? No wonder God can't get a word in edgewise. We are inundated with all this other stuff. God wants to get us out of our fishbowl faith. He wants us to get back to Him. He wants us to see what actually matters most. And when we can focus on Him, we stop forgetting the things that matter most. I mean, I found myself walking into my garage the other day, and I was in there like, what am I doing here? What did I come out here to get? It was really important. I got up from my chair, I opened the door, I went out here, and I'm like just looking at everything like, it's gonna come to me, right? It's gonna come to me. And that's like a warning sign, right? Has that ever happened to anybody else? Don't leave me alone. Okay, I'm just making sure. That's a warning sign like, John, you've got way too much information going on in your brain. It can't even handle this stuff. You need to get rid of it and focus on a few things that matter the most. So how do we beat out the goldfish? How do we hear what God's saying again? A lot of times God will bring us to a place of isolation to restore intimacy. He'll bring us back to a quiet place so we can hear Him again. Through one word, surrender. It's the word that God spoke over my heart for 2020, surrender. Now, I'm not saying wave the red flag and give in to the temptations, give in to the fears, give in to your enemies. That's not what God had brought David to the cave for. He didn't want him to surrender to Saul and give up on his call. No. He wanted him to surrender to Him, surrender his timeline, surrender his fears. For David and for us, everything feels pretty out of control. The truth is that you and I only have control over one thing, and that's how quickly we'll surrender our cares to the one God who cares and is actually in control. How quickly will we surrender? To that end, I want to call us to 40 days of surrender, a spiritual journey over the next 6 weeks that starts tomorrow. It's going to lead us and prepare us for what it is that God wants to do in our hearts on Resurrection Weekend, Easter weekend. And I want us to be ready for that, but I don't want you to wait until Easter weekend to surrender. I want us to surrender now. And sometimes we can need to commit to a spiritual journey in order to see our hearts retrained and refocused on what matters most. And so if you'd like to join us on that, hundreds already have, just text the word surrender to our church phone number, 808-842-4242. And starting tomorrow, you'll get a link sent to your phone with a fresh journal entry, either from Pastor Wayne, myself, or one of our staff or leaders, inviting you to a fresh place of surrender on a daily basis. Because again, the only thing we're in control of is how quickly we'll surrender to the one God who cares and is actually in control. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your cares on Him because He cares for you. David had a lot of cares. I think we do too. Those cares are coming at us from a 24/7 news cycle, from a worldwide issues and situations. That's not even counting the stuff going on in our own homes and our own hearts. How many of you guys believe that God cares for you? Then don't carry your cares anymore. It's crushing Christians. We cannot bear the weight of it. The Greek wording here for casting your cares is literally to roll your cares over onto the Lord. His shoulders can handle it. He's got the whole world in His hands. Our cares are not too heavy for Him, but they are too heavy for us. And before David could ever face that throne, he needed to learn this process of casting his cares onto the Lord. And a lot of the ways that we do that isn't because we can find like a, retreat center somewhere. A lot of times we need to learn how to do that in the middle of the madness, the messiness, and the busyness. And that's why I want to remind us during these 40 days to embrace the power of the pause, to press the pause button, to close the laptop, to switch the phone off, or to redeem the phone. Maybe you can do what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks and download this free app called the 1 Minute Pause. It's from one of my favorite authors, John Eldredge. And he developed this pause to go with his new book, Getting Your Life Back, some spiritual disciplines to practice on a daily basis. And it's so simple, you would think, why do I need that? It literally just reminds you at set times. I set it for 10 and 2, like your hands on the wheel. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. So it reminds me at 10 and at 2 to stop and pause, gives me some prayers to pray, some scriptures to pray through. I've been trying it for a couple weeks, and I found it so life-giving. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, John, you're a pastor. Don't you pray all the time? Well, here's the truth. I wish that was true. But I can move really quickly from working with God to simply working for God, and I can get just as stressed out as anyone else. And this pause has reminded me to just breathe in Him, to center myself in Him, to focus back on Him. And it's been doing wonders for my relationship with God. So I hope you'll download that. Join us on this spiritual journey for the next 40 days. You may want to fast social media for 40 days. You may want to fast some sugar or just something that's not really good for you right now for 40 days. I'll leave that between you and the Lord. But the big point is that you and I surrender. And before Pastor Jesse comes up, I want to illustrate the power of the pause through this clip from It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood that, it was an award-winning movie. Tom Hanks plays the real-life Fred Rogers. How many of you guys grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? Any of you guys? Okay, here's the proof. Let me hear it. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Could you be mine? Would you be mine? Right? I was going to wear a cardigan, but I decided not to. I was going to ask Jesse to wear a cardigan, but I thought, no, it's his first time out. I'm not going to make him wear a cardigan. But Tom Hanks just does this extraordinary job. It's not a Christian movie per se, but as we all know, Fred Rogers was a Presbyterian minister who devoted his life to ministering the love of Jesus through public television and puppets. And God ended up using him in amazing ways. And so Tom Hanks it's a true story about how Lloyd Vogel, this Esquire magazine guy whose heart was hardened from hurts from his father, he was going to disprove this good Fred Rogers image. He thought there's no way anyone can be that good. And it ends up that he was that good because God was that good. And we pick up in this scene where they're sitting in a Chinese restaurant, and in the middle of the hurt and pain and the bustle of this restaurant, Fred Rogers asks him to pause, and he asks him to do something. When he asks Lloyd to do it, I want to ask you to do it right along with him and see what God does in just 1 minute. Take a look.
Bill was right. You love people like me.
What are people like you? I've never met anyone like you in my entire life.
Broken people.
I don't think you were broken. I know you are a man of conviction. A person who knows the difference between what is wrong and what is right. Try to remember that your relationship with your father also helped to shape those parts. He helped you become what you are. Would you do something with me, Lloyd? It's an exercise I like to do sometimes. We'll just take a minute and think about all the people who loved us into being.
I can't do that.
they will come to you. Just 1 minute of silence. Thank you for doing that with me. I feel so much better.
You know, I've been thinking about that question often, right? I've been thinking about that question of who are the people that have loved me into being. And right at the top of the list, of course, outside of God, is my parents, who have paved the way of faithfulness for me. And right under them is my best friends, who have shaped me, encouraged me, corrected me. And right behind them is the community of faith alongside the leaders here at New Hope, Pastor Cindy and Pastor John, who truly, truly champion the youth of New Hope Oahu. And they encourage us and they call out our best and they see our potential. And even when we mess up, they say, hey, that's what you did, but it's not who you are. And I don't know about you, but I'm thankful for my leaders. Are you thankful for Pastor John and Pastor Cindy? And I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm thankful and excited. A funny story, I remember one of the first times I met Pastor John. And we're out in Waianae at one of our youth camps. And it was the final day. We're on our final day of dodgeball. And if you're a youth in here and you've been to camp, you know how monumental these final games are. If you win it, you'll get first. If you lose, you'll get last. And it's just one of the most monumental events you can be a part of at camp. And we're at this final day of dodgeball, and I'm leading a team. And I have my team gathered, and all of a sudden they start getting worried. And a look of worry grows over their face, and they're looking at the other leaders on the other team. And they're looking at me. And they're looking at the other leaders. And now they're getting more worried, and they said, Jesse, those leaders look like they live at the gym. But you look like you've never been to the gym your whole life. And I said, mean but true. And now they're getting really worried. So I said, I'm going to do what any great leader would do. I'm going to do an inspirational speech. I say, all right, team, gather up. And I have my team gathered. And I look at them and I say, all right, team, I understand the chances of winning looks grim. I do understand that. But let me tell you this. Not only are we going to lose this game, we're probably going to get obliterated. If we can be really honest, if you're looking at them, you're looking at me, maybe we should just give up, you know. And before they start to cry, a large shadow overcomes me. And I hear this heroic laugh. And someone talking about Star Wars and bacon and exotic cheeses, and I get confused, and I turn around, and lo and behold, it's Pastor John Burgess. And I was like, Pastor John, what are you doing here? Like, you do know this is Waianae, right? And he says, of course I know, but today is my son Elijah's birthday, and we brought malasadas to celebrate. And he's like, what are you guys doing? Playing dodgeball? And I was like, yeah, we're playing our final game. And then he said one of the most profound words I've ever heard a pastor say in my entire life. He said, can I join? And I was like, can you join? Of course you can. Like, you'll be the perfect target. I mean, the perfect player for us. Like, you just stand right here. I'll be right here, you know? Like, you can see them. You can see me. We need you right now. And I don't know about you, but I'm thankful for leaders who believe in you. Can we just thank them one more time? Awesome. You know, they're like, Jesse, do you want to help me on a weekend? And I said, are you sure you want to do that? And I said, we think so. We believe in you. You can do it. And I owe this church so many things. One of those things I should owe them is money, because I have broken so many things as a youth leader. I laugh about it now, but it's really not that funny when it happens. When I was 18, the leadership looked over at me and they said, hey, who's that awkward 18-year-old homeschooler in the corner? Hey, bring him over here. Let's give him way too much authority than he can handle. And they did that. And I'm not even joking. On one of my first weekends, you know those massive roll-up gates, those warehouse ones with the chains? We broke the gears for it, and it cost thousands to repair. And the church leaders were like, that really happened. And I said, we're off to a good start. Thank you. There is more to come. And I'm thankful and I'm grateful, and I think about it more, and I really don't deserve this opportunity. And the more I think about it, even no matter what age you are, we really don't deserve a majority of opportunities we have in life. And I was reading through this passage, and I was looking through the life of David, and I bet he was thinking the same thing, right? God, I don't deserve this. Can I just catch a breather? Like, you just promised me a crown in the fields, and yet here I am trapped in the caves. And I'm 23, and I love talking to people my age about tough seasons, right? We just love this word seasons. You know, we're infatuated with it. We're like, seasons, it's the new thing. And I love talking to people my age, and they'll say, man, Jesse, I'm just in a tough season right now. School is tough. I'm full-time school. Work, full-time. Work is getting tough. The bills are getting tough. And worst of all, no Chick-fil-A in Hawaii. And I'll be like, yeah, the first three, I guess, but that last one, that one really hurt my soul. You see, but God gives us such fresh perspective. You see, David was on the run from Saul for a decade. Joseph was behind bars for years. Elijah was suicidal and had a death threat over his head. Jonah was swallowed by a whale. Paul had lived with a thorn in his flesh. And God asked David this question in the caves. David, can you love me as well in the caves as you have loved me in the fields? Can you love me despite the change of scenery? When the suffering arises, when the pain comes your way, can you still love me the same? And I'm not married, but I think we can all agree to one degree or another that love is easy, loving God is easy, loving people is easy when life is easy, isn't it? When the schedule is free, when the bills are paid, when the kids are listening, amen? When everything's going well, loving God and loving people is easy. But I love looking at this passage because it tests the affection of David. And the caves examine the authenticity of his faith, and it will do the same for you and for me. The hard times will examine our faith, and it's going to say, hey, do we love God truly as much as we say we do when everything is going well? Loving God is easy when things are easy. Allow me to illustrate. On Sunday mornings, I get to hang out with a bunch of 4th and 5th graders, and they're here with us today. They're some of my favorite people, and they're waving slippers right now. That's how excited they are. And on some mornings, I'll walk over here just to make them uncomfortable. On some mornings, you guys make my job incredibly easy, right? Some days, Manny will come over and he's like, Manny, I heard you talking. Jesse, I heard you were saying, you like desserts. So I baked you a cake, and here you go. You can have it. You can keep the pan, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, you're amazing, Manny. I'll put this in the corner, and then who we got over here? Caleb. Caleb will run up and say, Jesse, it looks really hot out. You stay right there. I'm going to get you some water. You stay right there. He'll grab me some water, and I'm like, you guys make my job so easy. But on other weeks, they're laughing because they know it's true. On other weeks, they make my job incredibly tough, and Kaleo's here, and he'll run in and he'll have no shoes on. I'll say, Kaleo, where'd your shoes go? You just had them on 30 seconds ago. And he'll say something like, I don't know, potatoes, and he'll run away. Who's over here? We got the Burgess twins, and they'll be crawling on the ceiling, and I'll be like, how'd you guys get up there? And they'll say, we had Chick-fil-A. And I'll say, makes sense. Loving God is easy when things are easy, but when things get tough, love gets tougher. One weekend, a student came over to me and he said, Mr. Jesse, we have a problem. I said, that's always a good start to a week. And what do we got? Nothing can surprise me. And he shows me this. I said, writing that down on the list, I'll be here for 45 years paying that off in total. Got the warehouse gate on that. And I start freaking out, and I laugh about it now, but it was not funny in the moment. And leaders are talking to me, and I'm like, I need to fix this. Like, this is not okay. I need to get this right. I need to repair this. And I said, all right, I'm going to fix it this weekend. It's going to be fantastic. And then I realized that I can't fix anything with my hand. I only break things, and I can barely boil water. And so I go to our high school pastor. I say, Pastor Paul, you got to do me a favor. You got to help me. Look at the wall. I'm not good right now. I'm freaking out. You need to help me with this. And he said, Jesse, calm down. It's going to be okay. We're going to do this together. We're going to fix this. So I go over. We're in the week. He's fixing it. I'm handing him tools. I'm like, you got this. You're doing great, man. And he's teaching me. And we step back. And we're like, that looks fantastic. We're gonna leave that there. We'll repaint the next week, let it sit. And I was like, all right, we're good. Next week, student comes up and says, Mr. Jesse, we have a small problem. I said, do we now? You just said that last week. You got to give me like every other week at least, And he said, Mr. Jesse, we have a small problem. And they show me this. Now, I promise, I cannot fake this even if I tried. This is the next Sunday, right? Two things I want to point out for clarity. Right above, that's the drywall we just fixed from the previous hole. You can tell we just needed to repaint it. Like, that's it. That was the only thing. And two, yes, those are the outline of shoes. And I will not name who it was because I love you guys that much. And I thought about it now, and I looked at that, and I said, that's it. That's it. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm going to be the first volunteer at New Hope to get fired. That's it. I'm the first one. I'm going to be it. Pastor Wayne himself will fly down from Oregon, and he's going to give me a trophy. He's going to say #1 worst leader. And I was like, that's it. He's going to say, we appreciate your service, but it's time to go. And I laugh about it now, and I look at those photos of the walls, and as silly as it sounds, I think our life can be the same. It can be the same. We're literally beat down, and our soul has holes in it, and we are trashed, and we're getting thrown around by this storm. And the moment that we repair it, the moment we take a breather and we say, things look good. This season looks fruitful. We are beat down again, and the wave comes in that we were not expecting. And the storm subsides, and we find out the death of a loved one who we thought would live forever. And things are going well, and the bills come in again that seem never ending. Everything starts seeming well, and then you find out that someone has cancer in your family. I love this passage from David because he's so raw and he's so real. If you look with me, Psalms 142. I love this. The honest prayer of a young man who's in suffering. It says this, when my spirit grows faint within me, it is you, Lord, who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. I read through this and I realized this, that dark caves make for sincere prayers, don't they? And I bet you can testify to this, that your most honest and sincere prayers have probably been at your darkest hour. And you probably don't need to think long about when that season was because it probably gives you nightmares every season. I love this. The caves begin to test David's affection. And the authenticity of David's faith is examined. And God is asking David this question, but he's also asking you this question. Can you love me in the caves just as well as you have loved me in the fields? You can write this, point number 2. The caverns compel us to trust God's calling. The caverns compel us to trust God's calling. I think we can get caught up in this word calling sometimes, but really every time we see in Scripture this word calling, we're seeing the Lord is calling and beckoning us towards himself. He's asking us, can you reflect my character? And the test for David was this. The call for David was, can you love me well despite the scenery? when the scenery changes, when the suffering arises, when the pain is at your doorstep, can you love me the same? I love this quote. To discover the real you, pay attention to how you react when suffering arises. A lot of us have a fake self that we don't realize is fake until we realize suffering comes our way. Pay attention to yourself when suffering arises. I love what Timothy Keller says. He says, suffering will either make you a better person or it will make you worse, but it will never leave you the same. The question for us today is, do we look to God in the caves, or are we looking for a way out? You see, David had an opportunity to find an easy way out. He had an opportunity to cut corners, an opportunity to cut corners and take an easy way out. And we see this in 1 Samuel 24. It's in your notes. And it says this. It says, he came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there. And Saul went in to relieve himself, and David and his men were far back in the cave. And the men said, this is the day the Lord spoke when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, and he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. The awesome thing is I got to go to Israel about 1.5 years ago, and we came back, and it was life-changing. And when people say, like, you need to go, like, before anything happens, like, I didn't believe it until I went, and it changed my life. And we actually got to stand outside these caves, and we have a photo as well. But I can tell you that it is not a pretty sight. It reeks of suffering, and the aroma is painful. You can see how desolate it is. And the ironic thing outside of this cave is there's a sheep pen. And really, David would understand this the most out of anyone. David was a professional shepherd. And sheep pens in ancient days, their design was to guard the sheep at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, the shepherds would lead the sheep into the sheep pen, and it would guard against wolves and predators and anyone wishing to harm the life of the sheep. And if you can picture the irony with me of a professional shepherd and this wolf that is Saul walking through the sheep pen, and it's this ironic question of God saying, David, can you trust me to be your shepherd? Even when this wolf is walking onto your doorstep, can you trust me that I will protect you? You see, people will not be impressed by how well we love God in the fields, but they will be impressed by how well we love in the caves. People expect us to love well when things are easy. But I can tell you that your coworkers will start turning ahead when you start loving, when you find out that things are not going your way, that finances are not the way you expected, that health is not going how you wanted it to go. When you find out the death of a loved one, but you still have joy in your eyes, and you still say, God, you are who you say you are. You promised me a crown in the field, but even though I am trapped in a cave, you are who you say you are. I love this picture of 400 men being gathered around David. And in 1 Samuel 22, we have a description of who they were, and it says they were distressed, they were discontent, and they were in debt. Anyone in debt here? Amen? Like we feel that weight of distress. Yeah, that's me. Discontent. That's me. In debt. That's definitely me. And God is saying this. He says, I not only want to step into your dark hour, but I want you to do the same for the people around you. See, God brings zeros in a cave and he makes them heroes, not because of what they did, but because his spirit is resting upon them. You see, point number 3, is caverns are a catalyst to changing our culture. Caverns are a catalyst to changing our culture. I love what it says in Psalms 142:7. It says, set me free from my prison that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. I love this picture of God, and it paints God as a God that steps in. He is the God of the cosmos, but he is also the God of the trenches. and he steps into our darkness and says, hey, I'm right here. You may have forgotten, you may have thought you were in silence, but to God, silence is not absence. And God is saying, man, I'm about to step in a real, tangible way, and it will not only transform your heart, but it will transform the lives of the people around you. They need you while you're in the caves. I'll close with this story, and we'll finish for today. But every year on the week in which Father's Day lands, our students will write Father's Day cards to their dad, their brother, their grandpa, their uncle, anyone who's been a father figure in their life. And one year we had all of our students gathered. Everyone's writing their letters, and they're writing their notes. And one of our students, he gets up, and he throws his card on the table, and he says, this is the dumbest thing ever. He says, why would I write this card when I don't even have a dad? This makes no sense. And he throws his card on the table, and he walks out to play basketball. And I follow him, and I was trying to find the words to say, but I just couldn't that week. Like, I couldn't find anything to say to him. And so I just decided to play basketball. And the Lord said, you don't have to say anything. You just have to step in. You don't have to say anything. You just have to sit next to him. That's it. So I did that for about a year. And he was the type of kid where he would not budge at all. And stubborn and rebellious. And one weekend I said, well, can you at least tell me one thing you did at school? And he said, I'll tell you one thing I did at school. A kid looked at me funny today. So I punched him in the face. And I said, all right, it's that kind of week, huh? You know, like, I feel that. Okay. You know, so I would just sit next to him, and we did that for like a year. And next year, Father's Day comes around, and everyone's writing their Father's Day cards. And I see him writing a little something. And so I was like, oh, this is awesome. And all of a sudden, he stands up, and he throws his card on the table. And I was like, oh, we were so close. You know, he throws his card on the table, and he walks out. And I saw him writing something. I said, hey, bud, don't forget your card. I saw you writing something. Don't forget to bring this back home with you. And he said, Mr. Jesse, I know you didn't forget that I don't have a dad. But this year, this card is for you because you're the closest thing I got. And that was a few years ago, and I still have that card, and I hold it very tightly because it reminds me that, man, God not only wants to step into your darkness, but he wishes for you to do the same for the people around you. And we're going to close with just a moment of silence. And if that's really you in here, and you're being really honest with yourself, and you're being really honest with God, the smile that you walked in here probably isn't what you're feeling in actuality. I think in Western Christianity, we love this idea of showing face, but little do we know the person you're sitting next to is hurting just as much as you are. And so if we're really honest with ourselves, we can say, man, this is probably one of the worst seasons of our life. And maybe it's not for you, but for many of you, maybe this is a dead end. And maybe you think like there's nowhere to go. You think you don't know what to do. You don't know what to turn to. And I'd like to do this just like what we did with Fred Rogers. We're just going to take a moment. And we'll just take a few seconds. And would you just think of this season you're in? And would you start to just pray to God? And you can just take a moment. Silence can be uncomfortable. And I love this to God. Silence is not synonymous with absence. And if you're here in this place and you're saying, Jesse, man, that is me. I'm probably in one of the worst seasons of my life. If that's you, could you just shoot up a hand and say, yeah, that's me. Man, I'm going through a horrible time right now. It seems like a nightmare that is not ending. Yeah, and God sees that. And God is wanting to encourage us today before you leave that he is not only the God of the universe, he's the God of the trenches. And he's the God who gets his hands dirty. And he steps into the cave with us and says, you're not alone. Would you stand with me today as we close in prayer? And if that's you in here and you feel like you're going through something, can you just cup your hands like you're getting something for free? And would you pray this prayer with me today? Dear Jesus, I need you now, more than ever. And though it may be dark, you are here.
You are here.
You are for me.
You are for me.
You love me.
You love me.
And you will never leave me.
And you never leave me.
So Lord, help me to worship
So help me to worship
when things are not going my way.
when things not going my way.
And though it may be silent,
And there may be silence.
you are present.
You are present.
I trust you.
I trust you.
I love you.
I love you.
I need you.
I need you.
And it's with that all God's people say, amen. Can you give Jesus a shout of praise in this place?